friends, and welcome to Intro to Urban Places. So, in this unit, we're mostly going to focus on urban places, how urban places are designed, and urban issues. But today, we're going to just talk about human settlement a little bit. We're going to discuss some of the differences between rural and urban places. So, in Canada, a rural place is defined as a community with a population of less than 1,000 individuals and 400 or less inhabitants per square kilometer. Some of the pros of living in a rural community include privacy and space, affordability. On average, property costs are lower, so more people can afford to purchase property. There is more freedom on private property. Typically, in urban places, there are more restrictions on what you're allowed to do on your own property in terms of noise and other things like that. So, if you're a rural resident, you have more freedom on your own property. There are more things that you can do in the great outdoors, and typically, there are lower crime rates. Some of the cons to living in a rural place include less employment opportunities, lower connectivity, including typically less cell phone reception and less options to connect to the internet. Education, if you would like to pursue higher education, you have to move or travel in order to pursue those things. Healthcare, if you require specialized care, often you need to travel elsewhere. And due to a lack of competition in rural stores, typically goods cost a little bit more and there's less of a selection. So in Canada, an urban area is defined as having a population of at least 1,000 people and a density of 400 people or more per square kilometer. This photo is just a random street in London. I thought it was kind of cool. And kind of something else that's a little bit interesting is that the definition of urban changes depending on where you are. So, for example, in Japan, an urban place is somewhere that has more than 50,000 people. In America, an urban place is somewhere that has more than 2,500 people. And in France, an urban place is somewhere that has more than 2,000 people, and there must not be more than 200 meters in between houses, which is kind of a random one. Oh, and in Norway, an urban place is somewhere with just more than 200 people, which is just kind of neat to look at a comparative outlook on what urban means depending on where you are. So this slide doesn't appear to be working and unfortunately didn't format as nicely as the other ones, but regardless, some of the pros of living in an urban area include a higher selection of goods to purchase, and an increase in competition means that the buyer has more control over how they're spending their money. So, for example, if you need to purchase, I don't know, a pair of rubber boots, if you try to purchase them in a rural community, likely there's only one style and there's only one pair, and that's the set price. And if you really want rubber boots, you have to buy that pair of boots. But if you're in an urban area, if you don't like the style or the price isn't what you're willing to pay, you can go to another store and shop around. In urban areas, typically there is better cell phone reception and more opportunities to connect to the internet. Prices for some of those utilities are often a little bit lower as well, particularly internet. There's a more diverse community. There are more employment and education opportunities, and there are more recreation opportunities and options. So some of the cons of living in an urban area include traffic and congestion, pollution, whether that be noise pollution, light pollution, or air pollution, a lack of privacy. This can be out in public or even on your own property. Maybe your neighbors can see you in your windows, or maybe you don't have a fence. I don't know. And there's often less sense of community. So people in urban areas don't always know their neighbors or, whoever, like all the people. If you went to a bigger school, for example, you might not know everyone in your class, things like that. So now we're going to shift focus a little bit and we're going to talk about depopulation and urbanization. So depopulation, in this case, is the movement of people away from rural areas and the growing of cities and other urban areas. So in 1867, 82% of the population was situated in rural areas, and now over 80% of people live in urban areas. Why is this? Well, growing food used to be very difficult. It was very labor and resource intensive. You can see in this photo over here, there's 3 men operating one threshing machine, throwing what I presume is wheat into the machine. So this is obviously a lot more resource intensive than farming today is. So there were more family farms and there were a lot more people that dedicated their time to growing food. So due to industrialization and the increased use of machines meant that less of the population had to farm, and also immigration. Newcomers to Canada are typically interested in working in cities and not really working in agriculture. So at the start of industrialization in Canada in the agriculture sector, there was this domino effect that happened. So birth rates were starting to fall. Young people were moving off of farms. Rural unemployment climbed, in part because of machines. People were kind of not really happy with some of the amenities in rural areas, like a lack of conveniences, and there were a lack of schools. A lot of people ended up getting jobs in cities and then just ended up moving to urban areas. And for the most part, a lot of small farms simply weren't able to make enough income from farming the conventional way. So people just moved off of farms, and many small farms were bought out by bigger farms, and then the average size of a farm just grew bigger and bigger. So many cities started off as small agricultural trading centers. Now, their continuing expansion is consuming this high-quality agricultural land. Good farmland is limited and being lost as urban centers expand. Urbanization in Canada is concentrated to a relatively small area. Ontario's Golden Horseshoe, which is around the Toronto area, Montreal, BC's Lower Mainland around Vancouver, as well as Vancouver Island and the Calgary-Edmonton corridor. So keeping in mind that all of these communities listed here, these all started out as small farming communities. So as those communities grew larger, that's where all of the prime, wonderful farmland is. So Ontario has the highest percentage of urbanization. From 1971 to 2001, the rate of urbanization increased dramatically in Canada. At this time, a lot of the baby boomers, which are the people that were born following World War II, they reached the age where they were interested in purchasing houses and starting families. And the popularity of cars contributed greatly to urbanization. So you can see here, there's a map of Winnipeg. Winnipeg was mostly concentrated in this small area in 1971, and it has just grown outward like crazy since then. So suburbs and urban sprawl. So the increased use of cars and people living in cities caused urban sprawl, which is where cities expand outward in low density housing developments. In 2001, 46% of dependable agricultural land was located under urban areas. So I have just a couple photos here. You can see this is Sage Creek in Winnipeg, near St. Vital. So you can see there's actually only 2 roads going in and out of this big neighborhood, and there's a lot of houses in here. So that's not very efficient. And over here we have Island Lakes, which is the suburb next to Sage Creek, and there are no sidewalks. Most of these suburbs are designed to be very car-centric. As you can see, everyone has a driveway and everyone has a garage, but there are no sidewalks. So typically in these communities, especially the ones that don't have sidewalks, people drive everywhere. There could be a school, I don't know, like maybe 2 streets over, and every day people still drive their kids to the school because they don't really have any other option because there's no sidewalk because these neighborhoods were designed for cars. So that wraps up the content for today. Next, we'll be discussing major urban centers. So for today, please answer these questions and submit them to me. So I have a box here, so please list some advantages and disadvantages to living in urban and rural areas. If you can, try to think of ones that we didn't talk about in this video. I'm interested to know, where would you prefer to live? In an urban area or a rural area, and why? In your own words, briefly describe the population shift from rural to urban in the last 100 years. And should the land on the edge of urban centers be used for agriculture or for housing? And why do you think so? Thank you for watching. Bye.